The air was thick with heat, even before the sun had fully risen over the Louisiana horizon. The fields stretched out endlessly, their rows of cotton heavy with white blooms that glistened faintly in the dawn. For Samuel, 10 years old and already bent beneath the weight of expectation, the fields were not a place of wonder. They were a prison, a world he had been born into, a world he had never been given the choice to leave. His small fingers were raw, blistered from days that never seemed to end. Each morning began the same, the rattling sound of the overseer's bell, the bark of his voice demanding bodies out into the dirt, and the shuffle of feet too weary to run but too afraid to linger. Samuel's mother used to tug him close before they left the cramped, dark cabin they shared with others. She'd whisper to him, "Keep your head down, baby. Don't give them no reason." But reasons were not needed here. The whip searched for flesh the way a storm searches for thunder. Samuel remembered the first time he saw the whip slice through the air. He had been 5 years old, clinging to the hem of his mother's dress as his father was dragged away. His father's cries still echoed in his bones, the sound of leather cracking against skin, the sound of a man's dignity broken open for all to see. That was the last time Samuel saw him. One morning he was there in the cabin, and by sundown he was gone, sold, torn away like a weed ripped from the soil. The memory haunted Samuel, though he tried not to dwell on it. Dwelling only hurt now, in the fields. The overseer's shadow loomed over him. Carter hadn't come yet, that was for later. The man who watched them this morning was older, less cruel, though no less sharp with his commands. Samuel's small sack filled slowly, too slowly for the pace demanded. His fingers trembled as he reached for the fluffy white bowls, careful to avoid the hidden thorns that tore at his skin. The sun climbed higher. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. Other children worked nearby, boys and girls no older than Samuel. Their faces were blank, masks carved from exhaustion. Childhood had been stolen from them all. There were no games, no lessons, no laughter here, only work, only survival. At midday, Samuel stumbled. His sack spilled, cotton scattering across the dirt. His heart froze in his chest. "Pick it up, boy," the overseer barked. Samuel scrambled on his knees, clawing the cotton back into the sack. His breath came in ragged gasps. He wanted to cry, but he bit his lip until he tasted blood. Crying drew attention. Attention drew the whip dot by nightfall. When they were finally herded back toward the cabins, Samuel's body ached as if every bone had been broken. His sack was light compared to the others, and he knew what that meant. Tomorrow would be worse. Tomorrow would bring punishment. His mother sat beside him on the dirt floor, pulling him close. She smoothed his hair with a hand that trembled from her own day's work. Her back was bent, her skin lined with scars that told their own story. "Of survival, you did good today," she whispered, though both of them knew it was a lie. Samuel pressed his face into her chest, where her heart beat steady and strong despite everything. For a moment, in that fragile space, he allowed himself to believe her words. He allowed himself to imagine that he was more than just hands to pick cotton, more than a number in a ledger. But as the overseer's boots crunched past the door and the rattle of chains echoed in the night, Samuel remembered the truth. He was a child born in chains, and innocence was a luxury he had never been allowed to keep. The cabin stank of sweat, dirt, and despair. It was not a home, but a cage, built from rough planks that left gaps wide enough for the night air to creep through. Rats scurried in the corners, searching for scraps. The slaves had no food left to give. Samuel lay curled on the ground, pressed close to his mother's side, while other bodies crowded around them. Some snored softly, too weary to notice the discomfort. Others groaned in restless half-sleep, their pain following them even into dreams. Samuel's stomach growled, a hollow ache that no amount of silence could ignore. He shifted against his mother, whispering, "Mama, I'm hungry." Her hand found his cheek in the dark. She sighed, and though she tried to keep her voice steady, Samuel heard the sorrow in it. "I know, baby. Close your eyes. Morning. Come fast." Morning always came too fast. When the first light bled into the horizon, the overseer's bell rang out, harsh, metallic, and final. The sound of chains followed, the clinking of shackles, as men and women stirred, rising with heavy limbs. Some muttered prayers under their breath. Others said nothing at all. Samuel's mother guided him outside, her hand tight around his wrist. He tried to walk quickly, though his legs still ached from the day before. They joined the line that wound its way to the fields, each person carrying a rough sack over their shoulder. The master stood waiting at the edge of the rows. He was a tall man with cold eyes and the easy cruelty of one who had never known hunger, never known fear. His clothes were spotless despite the dirt around him, and in his hand he carried a cane, more for striking than for walking. "Move quick," he barked. "Sun's up, and so should the work be." Samuel lowered his gaze. He knew better than to meet the man's eyes. They scattered into the rows, bending low, plucking cotton with small, practiced motions. The sun was gentle in the early hour, but Samuel knew it would not last. By noon it would be like fire upon their backs, and there would be no shade, no rest. He worked slowly, his hands trembling as he tried to keep pace. His fingers brushed against the sharp bracts, tearing his skin. Thin rivulets of blood streaked his small palms, staining the cotton red before he quickly rubbed it against his shirt to hide it. The overseer passed through the rows, his whip coiled at his side. He stopped behind a woman who lagged, her swollen belly heavy in front of her. "You move slower than molasses," he snarled. The woman struggled to straighten. "Please, sir, The whip cracked before she could finish. She fell to her knees with a scream. Samuel flinched, his whole body recoiling. He bent lower to his task, his heart hammering, wishing he could close his ears, wishing he could close his eyes. The cries of the woman carried through the field. By the time she staggered back to her feet, the overseer had already moved on, his face hard with satisfaction. Samuel's mother was working a row over. He stole a glance at her, and their eyes met. For the briefest moment, she gave him the smallest nod, as if to say, "Keep going. Don't stop. Survive." The hours dragged, each one heavier than the last. Samuel's sack grew heavier too, though never as fast as the others. His small hands simply could not keep up. By the time the overseer called for the day's end, Samuel's sack sagged only half full. The slaves lined up to be weighed, their day's labor measured like grain at market. The master stood at the end, cane tapping against his boot. One by one, the sacks were dumped and judged. When Samuel's turn came, the overseer's lip curled. "This all you picked, boy?" Samuel lowered his head, shame burning through him. "Yes, sir." The cane lashed out suddenly, striking his side. He gasped, stumbling back. "Worthless," the master spat. "You'll learn. Tomorrow you'll do twice as much, or you won't stand at all." The others watched in silence. No one moved to help. To move was to invite the cane or the whip. That night, Samuel lay on the cabin floor, his body sore, his pride crushed. Tears pricked his eyes, but he buried his face in his arm so no one would see. His mother touched his back gently, whispering, "Don't let him take you, Samuel. Not the part that matters." He didn't understand what she meant, not yet. All he knew was that the pain in his ribs was sharp, his hands ached, and tomorrow the fields would still be waiting, and so would the master. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning began with a sky the color of ash. Clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of rain, but the overseer showed no mercy. Cotton didn't wait for storms to pass, and neither did the master's greed. Samuel trudged into the rows with his sack slung over his shoulder. His ribs still ached from the master's cane the night before, but he kept his face blank, his steps steady. Weakness invited cruelty. He had learned that much. Beside him, a boy named Josiah worked. Josiah was a year older, thin as a reed, with a quiet sadness in his eyes. The two rarely spoke. Talking was dangerous, but in silence they had formed a kind of friendship, sharing glances that said, "I see you. I know your pain." The overseer's boots crunched in the dirt, drawing closer. His whip swung loosely at his side, the leather stained dark from countless punishments. Samuel bent low, his small fingers moving quickly through the cotton. He dared not look up. Then it happened. Josiah's sack slipped from his shoulder. Cotton tumbled into the mud, soaking in the wet earth. The sound seemed to echo across the field. The overseer froze. Slowly he turned, his face twisting into a smile that chilled Samuel's blood. "Boy," he growled, "you best pick that up." Josiah dropped to his knees, scrambling to gather the ruined cotton. His hands shook so badly he could hardly hold it. I didn't mean," the whip cracked before he could finish. The sound split the air like thunder. Josiah screamed, his body jerking as the leather tore into his back. He fell face first into the mud, his hands clawing at the earth. Samuel's heart pounded. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, to help, but his mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Keep your head down. Don't give them reason." The overseer struck again and again, each lash tearing through Josiah's shirt, each one painting his back with blood. The boy's cries grew hoarse, breaking into sobs that silenced even the birds overhead. Finally, when Josiah no longer moved, the overseer spat in the dirt. "That'll teach you." He yanked the boy upright by his collar, shoving him back into the row. Josiah stumbled forward, barely able to stand. His eyes met Samuel's wide, glassy, full of pain. Samuel wanted to say something, anything, but his tongue felt heavy as stone. He bent back to his work, shame burning in his chest. By midday, Samuel's own body betrayed him. The sun beat down mercilessly, his vision swam, and his hands trembled so badly he dropped a bowl of cotton. It landed in the dirt, forgotten. The overseer saw. "Boy." Samuel froze. His throat went dry. The whip lashed out. Pain exploded across his back, sharp and searing. He gasped, stumbling to his knees. "You think you can slack?" The overseer snarled. Another strike, harder this time, tore through his shirt, the leather biting into flesh. Samuel cried out, the sound raw and desperate. He tried to scramble away, but the overseer's boot pressed into his shoulder, pinning him down. "Stay still, or I'll make it worse." The next lash ripped across his skin, then another and another. Each one felt like fire, like his body was being torn apart. The The world blurred through tears he could not hold back. When it was finally over, Samuel lay trembling in the dirt, his back a map of agony. The overseer sneered down at him. "You'll learn," he said. "All of you learn." The others worked. In silence, their faces stone. No one dared to help. That night, Samuel lay on his stomach in the cabin, every breath a dagger in his chest. His mother tried to clean the wounds with a rag dipped in water, but even her touch made him flinch. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Samuel turned his face toward the wall. The pain was unbearable, but worse than the pain was the humiliation, the knowledge that he had been made a spectacle, broken down in front of them all. His childhood ended with that whip. In its place came the lesson every slave learned sooner or later. Pain was not a punishment. It was a way of life, and it would never leave him. Asterisk, asterisk, the years passed, not in seasons, but in scars. Samuel's back carried more of them now than he could count, each one a memory branded into flesh. He had grown taller, stronger in the arms and shoulders from endless labor, but his body was still thin, his bones sharp against skin. Strength was not a blessing here. It only meant more work, more weight to carry, more tasks to endure. By 13, Samuel's hands looked like those of an old man, cracked and calloused from picking, hauling, scrubbing. The overseers had no patience for youth. Children were not spared. They were broken in early, taught to labor until their bodies matched the misery of their souls. Samuel's days blurred into routine. The dawn bell, the shuffle to the fields, the stooping rows of cotton stretching. Beyond sight, his sack grew heavier, his back bowed lower, his breath came shorter. Yet there was no end, no reprieve. Sometimes he caught glimpses of the others around him, hollow-eyed men, women with faces lined from years of grief, children who never played, never laughed. They worked as he did, their voices silent, their lives pressed down under the same crushing weight. He saw the old man Abraham collapse one afternoon in the heat. Abraham had worked those fields longer than Samuel had been alive, his body bent nearly double, his hair white with age. When he fell, the cotton spilled from his sack, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. The overseer strode over without hesitation. "Get up." Abraham tried. His arms trembled, his legs gave out. The whip answered. Samuel flinched at each strike, the sound sharp as thunder. The old man's cries rose, thin and broken, until they faded into silence. When Abraham did not move again, the overseer cursed, spat, and dragged his limp body aside. As though discarding rotten wood, no one spoke of him again. A week later, Samuel watched a woman named Ruth laboring in the fields, her belly round with child. Sweat ran down her face as she bent low, her breath coming fast. She stumbled, clutching her stomach, and fell to her knees. The overseer raised his whip. Samuel turned away, pressing his forehead into his sleeve. Unable to watch, yet unable to block out the screams that followed. That night, Ruth did not return to the cabins. Her child was never spoken of. Samuel's spirit began to fracture under the weight of these endless horrors. Each day, he felt a piece of himself slipping away, like sand carried off by the tide. He wondered if he was even human in the eyes of those who owned him, or if he was truly just an animal to be beaten, used, discarded. And yet, in the darkest hours, when exhaustion pressed him against the cabin floor and hunger gnawed at his stomach, Samuel sometimes remembered his mother's lullabies. faint echoes of a voice, soft and low, telling him once that he was loved, that he mattered. Those memories were like embers buried deep in ashes, small, fragile, but alive. It was all he had left. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The night air was heavy with the smell of sweat and damp earth. Samuel lay awake on the cabin floor, staring into the dark, his back burning from the day's labor. Around him, others groaned in restless sleep. His mother's breath was steady beside him, but even in sleep she looked weary, her brow furrowed, her body curled as though bracing against pain. Samuel closed his eyes and tried to remember her laughter. There had been a time, long ago, when she had smiled at him with warmth, when her voice carried joy. But those memories were faint now, worn thin by years of suffering. The next day began like any other. The bell, the shuffle, the fields. Samuel, bent low in his row, working with tired hands. The sun beat down, and every movement felt like lifting stone. His sack grew heavier, but not fast enough. He tried to push himself harder, ignoring the ache in his shoulders, but his body betrayed him. By midday, his pace slowed. Cotton slipped from his fingers. The overseer saw. "Boy," his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Lazy again." Samuel froze. His heart pounded. He tried to move faster, but his trembling hands fumbled the cotton. The overseer's whip cracked. Samuel flinched, bracing for the strike, but before the leather touched him, another figure stepped between them. It was his mother, her arms spread wide, her voice shaking but strong. "He's just a child. Please." The overseer's eyes narrowed. For a moment the field fell silent. Then the whip lashed out, not at Samuel, but at her. The sound was sickening. Eliza cried out as the leather tore across her back. Samuel screamed. "Mama!" He tried to reach for her, but the overseer shoved him back with the handle of the whip dot. Again the lash fell, and again. Each strike opened new lines of red across her flesh. Her body jerked, but she stood firm, shielding Samuel as long as she could. Finally, she collapsed into the dirt, her breath ragged, her body trembling. The overseer spat. "That'll teach you both." He turned away, leaving her broken in the dust. Samuel dropped to his knees beside her, tears streaming down his face. He tried to lift her, but his small arms could barely hold her weight. Her blood smeared against his hands, warm and sticky. That night, Eliza lay in the cabin, her body twisted with pain. Samuel stayed beside her, holding a rag to her wounds. Trying to cool her fever with water, he begged from the others. Her breath rattled in her chest, uneven, shallow. "Stay with me, Mama," he whispered. His voice cracked. "Please." Her eyes opened, faintly. She smiled a small, broken smile that tore Samuel's heart. Her hand, weak and trembling, touched his cheek. "Listen to me," she whispered. "You are more than their chains. Remember that." Samuel's throat closed. "Don't leave me." But her hand slipped from his face. Her eyes closed, and she was gone. The cabin was silent but for Samuel's sobs. The others turned away, their own grief too heavy, their own losses too many. Death was no stranger here, but for Samuel, the world had ended. The only light in his darkness, the only comfort in his chains, was gone. He buried his face in her still body and wept until no tears remained. From that night forward, the fields felt emptier, the world colder. Every lash of the whip, every command from the master, echoed with her absence, and her words burned in his mind like fire. You are more than their chains. Words that felt like hope. Words that felt like a wound. Asterisk, asterisk, the weeks after his mother's. Death blurred into one long ache. Samuel moved through the fields like a ghost, his body alive but his spirit hollow. He worked because he had no choice, ate when scraps were given, and lay in silence on the cabin floor at night. His mother's absence was everywhere, in the empty space beside him, in the silence where her voice should have been, in the loneliness that wrapped itself around his heart like a shroud. But grief was not enough to shield him. That was when Carter came. The old overseer had been harsh, but Carter was something different. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like cold steel, he carried the whip as though it were part of him. Where others inflicted pain out of duty, Carter did it out of pleasure. He smiled when the lash tore skin. He laughed when blood pooled in the dirt from the first day. Carter's gaze found Samuel. Perhaps it was the quiet fire in his eyes, perhaps just chance. Whatever the reason, Samuel became his target. "You there?" Carter barked on Samuel's first morning under him. "You think you can slack?" Samuel shook his head quickly, words catching in his throat. "No, sir," Carter sneered. "We'll see." The lash came for him that day, not for failure, not for mistake, but simply because Carter willed it. A strike across the back, then another, until Samuel's shirt clung wet with blood. That night in the cabins, Samuel lay trembling, his wounds raw. An older woman, Clara, pressed a strip of cloth to his back, whispering, "Don't let him see. You cry, that's what he wants." But Samuel couldn't stop the tears. Not yet. Day after day, Carter made sport of him. He gave Samuel the heaviest sacks, the longest rows, the dirtiest chores. When Samuel faltered, the whip was waiting. When Samuel endured, the whip still came. "Look at him," Carter sneered to the others one evening, dragging Samuel into the center of the field, thin as a stick, weak as a lamb. "You see what happens when you think you're more than dirt." Before everyone, he forced Samuel to strip his shirt, exposing the crisscross of scars across his back. Then he whipped him again, each strike a performance, each scream an entertainment. The others stood silent. Some turned their faces away, some wept quietly. None dared to intervene. Humiliation cut deeper than pain. Samuel felt his soul crumble under the weight of it. He wanted to vanish into the dirt, to become nothing, to escape the eyes upon him. But as the days dragged on, something inside him began to shift. The pain didn't lessen, but his cries grew quieter. His shame hardened into anger, his humiliation into resolve. Each strike still tore his flesh, but instead of breaking him, it carved something new into him, a core of silence, a will that Carter could not reach. At night, Samuel lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the cabin. His body throbbed, his scars burned, but his mind whispered with a dangerous clarity, "One day this will end. One day I will not bow." For now he bent. For now he endured. But Carter's shadow had lit a fire inside him, a fire that would not be put out. Asterisk, the nights in the cabins were the only times when words could slip free, soft as smoke. By day, silence was survival, but in the dark, with overseers gone and the master asleep in his great house, whispers moved. Like a secret wind through the quarters. Samuel listened. He lay curled on the dirt floor, his body aching from Carter's punishments, when he heard Abraham's brother, Isaiah, speaking low to a small circle of men. "Up north, they say, folks fight to end it. They say some got away, slipped through the swamps, crossed the rivers, found freedom. Freedom, someone repeated, almost like a prayer. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest. He closed his eyes and let the word echo inside him. Freedom, he didn't even know what it looked like, but the thought burned brighter than fire. They'll kill you if you try. Another voice muttered, "They'll kill us anyway, Isaiah," replied bitterness hard in his tone. Silence followed, heavy and thick. That night, Samuel dreamed of running. He saw himself in a forest, barefoot but fast, branches whipping past him. He imagined a sky without overseer's boots, a world without chains. His chest swelled with something he had not felt since his mother's death. Hope. The dream carried him through the next day, even as Carter shoved him into the dirt, even as his sack weighed heavy across his shoulders. But hope was dangerous. A week later, another boy, Daniel, no older than 15, vanished during the night. For a brief, breathless morning, the cabins hummed with excitement. Maybe he made it. Maybe he's free. By midday, the truth came. The overseers dragged Daniel back into the fields, his ankles and wrists bound, his body bruised and torn. They tied him to the whipping post while the slaves were forced to watch. Carter stood beside him, grinning. "This," he shouted, "is what happens to runaways." The whip came down, not once or twice, but dozens of times, until Daniel's back was nothing but shredded flesh. His screams echoed across the fields, mingling with the crows that circled above. Samuel turned away, but Carter seized him by the chin, forcing his gaze forward. "Look, boy," he snarled, "see what freedom costs." When the whip was finally stilled, Daniel was unrecognizable. He sagged against the post, silent, his life leaking into the dirt. The slaves were sent back to work, their silence deeper than before. The air itself seemed heavy with fear. That night, Samuel lay awake, staring at the cabin ceiling. His mother's words echoed inside him, "You are more than their chains." But Daniel's broken body haunted him, too. Freedom called to him like a song, but so did terror. He closed his eyes, his fists tight against his chest. He was trapped between two fires, the fear of death and the unbearable weight of living in chains. For the first time in his life, Samuel began to understand what it meant to choose. And though he was not ready yet, deep inside, the choice had already begun to form. By 17, Samuel's body was carved from toil and torment. His shoulders had grown broad, his arms strong from endless hauling and lifting, but his back carried more scars than skin. Every lash Carter had given him, every wound from the fields, lived there, a map of pain etched into flesh. Yet though his body bore the weight of chains, his spirit no longer bent so easily. Carter still singled him out, still drove him harder than the rest, but Samuel had learned the art of silence. He no longer screamed when the whip fell. He no longer wept in the dirt. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, enduring every blow without giving Carter the satisfaction of breaking him. It drove the overseer mad. "You think you're strong," Carter hissed one day, sweat dripping down his face as he raised the whip. "I'll show you what strong means." The lashes tore Samuel's skin, but he stood tall even as blood ran down his back. His chest heaved, his body trembled, but his eyes never left Carter's, and in that silence, that refusal to break, the others saw something, a glimmer of defiance. From then on, Samuel became more than just another body in the field. The others began to look at him differently, quietly, when Carter wasn't watching. They didn't speak it aloud, but in the stillness of night, Their glances said what words could not. You endure. Maybe we can, to Samuel began small acts of resistance. When scraps of bread were passed out, he tucked pieces away and slipped them to the younger children. When Carter ordered him to move faster, he slowed just enough to test the man's patience, but not enough to earn more than a curse. When the others sagged under their burdens, Samuel whispered words of strength, just as his mother once had. To him, it wasn't freedom, but it was something. At night, in the cabin, he began to speak in low tones to those who still carried fragments of hope. He asked Isaiah about the North, about the rebellions whispered in secret. Isaiah's voice trembled as he answered, but Samuel saw the fire flicker in his eyes again, a flame nearly smothered but not gone. You got her in you. Isaiah told him one night, his voice rough, your mama, she fought in her way. You fight in yours. Samuel carried those words like armor. Carter grew more furious with each passing day. The more Samuel endured, the harder he pushed, desperate to see the boy break. But instead of shattering, Samuel grew stronger, not in body, but in spirit. He had stopped asking himself if he was human in the master's eyes. He no longer cared. He was human because he chose to be. And though he knew the chains were heavy, though he knew freedom was a dream that could cost his life, the fire inside him burned hotter with every lash, every insult, every humiliation. The fire whispered of something greater than survival. The fire whispered of defiance. Asterisk, asterisk, the summer sun hung heavy over the fields, the heat choking, the air thick with sweat and dust. Samuel's back burned from fresh lashes, but he carried his sack in silence, as always. His body had learned how to endure, his soul had learned how to harden. But that day, something changed. Carter was in one of his moods, restless, cruel, hungry for suffering. His whip cracked louder than usual, not just to punish but to remind every soul who held the power. The slaves bent lower, hands trembling as they picked cotton, each praying not to draw his eye. Then a cry split the air. A boy, no more than 10, had stumbled, his sack too heavy for his small frame. He lay sprawled in the dirt, gasping, his arms trembling as he tried to lift himself. Carter's shadow fell over him. You useless rat, Carter spat, grabbing the whip. The boy whimpered, please, sir. The lash came down, tearing into the child's back. Once, twice, 3 times. His small body jerked with each strike, his cries piercing the silence of the field. Something inside Samuel snapped. The fire that had burned quietly within him, fed by years of pain, humiliation, and grief, roared into an inferno. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her whisper, you are more than their chains. Without thought, without hesitation, Samuel dropped his sack and strode forward. Stop, he said. His voice cut through the field, sharp and steady. Carter froze, startled, then slowly turned, whip still in hand. His lips twisted into a cruel grin. What did you say, boy? Samuel's chest heaved, his fists tight at his sides. I said, stop. Gasps rippled through the slaves. No one ever spoke back. No one dared. Carter's grin widened. So the mule thinks he's a man. The overseer raised his whip, aiming it at Samuel's face. But Samuel's hand shot out, catching the lever mid-air. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the field. Then Samuel yanked hard, ripping the whip from Carter's grip. The overseer stumbled, rage flooding his features. You'll die for this, he bellowed. Samuel's voice thundered back, louder than he ever knew it could be. Then I'll die a man. The slaves stood frozen, their eyes wide, their breaths caught in their throats. Some trembled with terror, others with awe. In that moment, Samuel was no longer just another broken body in the field. He was defiance itself, living and breathing before their eyes. Carter lunged, pulling a knife from his belt. Samuel struck first, slamming his fist into the overseer's jaw. The crack echoed like thunder. Carter staggered back, blood at his lip, shock flashing in his eyes. The field erupted in chaos. Some slaves cried out in fear, others whispered prayers under their breath. The children clung to each other, wide-eyed Dot. Samuel didn't care. He had crossed the line, and there was no return. The master's men came running from the big house. Guns raised, shouts cutting through the air. Samuel stood tall, chest heaving, Carter snarling on the ground before him. For one final moment, Samuel lifted his head to the sky. The sun blazed down, hot and merciless, but for the first time in his life, he felt free. The gunshot cracked. His body jolted. Another followed, then another. Dot. Samuel staggered, blood spilling down his chest. His knees buckled, but he forced himself to remain upright, even as life slipped from him. His eyes found the boy, the child he had saved, and for a fleeting second, a small, trembling smile crossed his face. Then he fell. The fields went silent. The overseers shouted orders. The master cursed. But the slaves saw only Samuel's body lying in the dirt. His face still turned toward the sky, and though he was gone, something had changed. The fire he had carried, the fire of defiance, of dignity, of humanity, did not die with him. It spread, quietly, from one heart to another. A whisper at first, then a steady hum. A promise carried through the cabins at night. We are more than their chains. Samuel's body was broken, but his spirit had become unbreakable. The last breath of his chains had become the first breath of their freedom.